The wind had a scent of dust and distance, a lonely perfume that clung to the worn serge of her coat. Anna stood where the wagon had left her, a solitary figure at a cruciform tear in the parched earth. Behind her, the ruts stretched back into a life she had sealed away. Ahead, the path dissolved into a shimmering haze that promised nothing but more of the same unending sky. She held a single, scuffed leather suitcase, its handle slick in her palm, its weight the sum of all she had left. A flicker of something cold and sharp moved behind her eyes, but her posture remained straight, a silent defiance against the vast, indifferent landscape that threatened to swallow her whole. There was no choice but to walk. She chose the path that tilted slightly toward a smudge of darker green on the horizon, a place where a roofline cut a sharp, unnatural angle against the soft curve of the distant hills. Each step was a deliberate act, a claim on a future she could not yet see. The sun beat down, turning the dust on her sensible shoes to a fine, pale powder. By the time the ranch house solidified from a mirage into a reality of weathered wood and stone, she was coated in the grit of her journey, her throat a desert. A man was there, his back to her, mending a fence post with the rhythmic economy of someone who has performed the task 1,000 times. His movements were a conversation with the wood and wire, patient and strong. He wore faded denim, and the muscles in his back and shoulders shifted under the fabric with a slow, powerful grace. He must have heard the crunch of her steps on the dry ground, but he did not turn until he had driven the final staple home, his hammer striking with a clean, definitive thud. Then he straightened, slowly, and faced her. His face was weathered like the house, carved by sun and wind into planes of quiet endurance. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held a neutral, assessing gaze that gave nothing away. He was not unkind, but he was not welcoming. He was a man accustomed to solitude, and she was an intrusion. Anna stopped a respectful distance away, placing her suitcase on the ground beside her as if setting down a burden. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the wind through the dry grass. She cleared her throat, the sound small in the immense quiet. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the tremor she felt in her bones. "I can cook, can clean, mend clothes. I can keep a garden." He continued to watch her, his gaze taking in the city cut of her worn clothes, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, and the stubborn set of her jaw. He was a man who understood hardship, and he saw it in her, but he also saw something else. "Bride. This is a cattle ranch," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse. "Not much call for a housekeeper. Every man needs to eat," she countered, her chin lifting a fraction. "And a clean place to lay his head. I don't ask for charity, just for work." He looked away from her, his gaze sweeping over the endless expanse of his land, a kingdom of grass and sky. He was alone here. The silence of the house behind him was a testament to that. He had grown used to it, or perhaps had simply learned to endure it. He looked back at her, a direct and challenging question in his eyes. "Why here?" Anna's gaze followed his out to the horizon, to the empty road she had walked. "It's where the road ended," she answered, the simple truth of it unadorned by plea or explanation. He considered her words and her. He saw the blister forming on her heel, the fine tremble in the hand she held at her side. He saw a resilience that matched the hard country around them. With a slow nod, he sealed their pact. "There's a room in the back. Small. Clean it yourself. Meals and a place to stay. We'll see how it goes." He did not offer a handshake, and she did not expect one. The agreement was as spare and pragmatic as the man himself. He gestured with his head toward the main house. "Kitchen's through there. I eat at sundown." He turned then and walked toward a barn, leaving her standing with her suitcase and the silent, unspoken terms of her new life. The main house was neat but stark, a space defined by function rather than comfort. Dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon light, illuminating surfaces that had been wiped clean but never polished. There were no photographs on the mantel, no cushions on the chairs, no sign of a life lived with anyone else. It was the immaculate shell of a lonely existence. Anna set to work. She found her small room, aired it out, and scrubbed the floor until the scent of pine soap replaced the stale smell of disuse. In the kitchen, she moved with a quiet efficiency that mirrored his own. She found flour, salt, dried beans. She stoked the fire in the cast-iron stove and, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, a pot of soup was simmering, and bread was baking, its warm, yeasty scent the first truly welcoming thing the house had known in a long time. Elias entered as dusk settled, shedding the dust of the day on the porch. He washed his hands and face at the basin, the water splashing, the only sound in the house. They ate at the small wooden table in silence. He ate with a focus that was not hunger but habit, his attention on his plate. Anna ate slowly, the food a balm to her weary body. The silence was not yet comfortable, but it was not hostile. It was a space they were learning to occupy together, two solitary planets now orbiting the same quiet sun. The days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons. He would rise before dawn, the sound of his boots on the floorboards her alarm clock. He would be gone for hours, a distant figure on horseback moving against the vast canvas of the plains. She would work in the house, her quiet labors a counterpoint to his. She swept and scrubbed, polished the dulled wood of the table until it gleamed, and mended his work shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She learned the geography of his silence, the subtle shifts in his posture that spoke of a good day or a hard one. She never asked about his life before, and he never offered. The house remained a place of unspoken histories. One afternoon, a sudden, violent thunderstorm rolled in from the west, the sky turning a bruised purple. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a grieving animal. A loud crack echoed from the direction of the small barn. When the storm passed, leaving the air washed clean and smelling of wet earth, they both went outside. A heavy branch had fallen, tearing a jagged hole in the barn roof. Elias stood looking at it, his face grim. "I'll fix it," he said, more to himself than to her. The next morning he was on the roof, his hammer ringing out in the clear air. Anna watched him for a moment from the kitchen window. Then, she wiped her hands on her apron, went outside, and climbed the ladder until she was standing on the sturdy part of the roof beside him. He stopped hammering and looked at her, a question in his eyes. She said nothing, simply reached for a stack of shingles and held them out for him. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then took them. All day they worked, a silent, coordinated team. She passed him shingles, handed him nails, her presence steady and unquestioning. They moved in a rhythm born of shared purpose. In the late afternoon, as he hammered the final shingle into place, he paused and looked at her. A shared glance of acknowledgement passed between them, a flicker of gratitude, of respect. It was more than they had ever said to each other. A few days later, Anna stood by a fallow patch of earth behind the house where the sun fell for most of the day. The soil was hard-packed and dry, choked with weeds. She found Elias sharpening an axe by the woodpile. "That patch of ground," she began, gesturing with her chin. "It gets good sun." He stopped his work, looking where she pointed. He understood what she was asking without her having to say the words. "Soil's hard," he said. "Nothing's grown there for a long time." "I'm not afraid of hard," she replied, echoing her words from their first meeting. He looked from the barren patch of earth to her determined face. A long moment passed. "If you've the mind to," he said finally. The next morning, he left a shovel and a pickaxe leaning against the back porch. When he returned that evening, he found she had already broken the first few feet of stubborn soil, her brow beaded with sweat, her hands raw. The day after, he came out after his own chores were done and, without a word, took up the pickaxe and began to work alongside her, his powerful swings breaking up the earth she could not. They worked until twilight, not speaking, the only sounds the bite of metal into dirt and their shared, rhythmic breathing. The garden became their common ground, a shared project that grew as they did. They planted rows of beans, squash, and tomatoes. Anna watered the tender seedlings each morning, her touch gentle. The first sight of green shoots pushing through the dark soil felt like a miracle, a promise whispered from the earth. One evening, while mending one of Elias's shirts by the fading light, her fingers brushed against something stiff tucked inside a worn leather-bound book on a low shelf. Curious, she drew it out. It was a photograph, faded and creased at the edges. It showed a younger Elias, his face softer, a genuine smile on his lips. His arm was around a woman with kind eyes, and in front of them stood a small boy with Elias's serious gaze. Family. A life before this one. She traced the edge of the photograph with her finger, a profound sadness settling over her, not for herself, but for the quiet man and the immense loss he carried in his silence. The sound of his boots on the porch made her start. He entered the room, and his eyes went immediately to the photograph in her hands. She did not try to hide it. She simply held it, her gaze lifting to meet his. The air grew thick with everything unsaid. His face was a mask, but she could see the flicker of old pain in the depths of his eyes. She expected him to be angry, to retreat further into his shell. Instead, he walked over, his movements slow and deliberate. He gently took the photograph from her, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting instant. He looked at it for a long moment, his thumb stroking the faded image of the woman's face. Then he slid it back into the book and placed the book back on the shelf. He never said a word. He didn't have to. In that shared, heavy silence, she understood the depth of his solitude, the reason for the walls he had built around his heart, the unspoken trust in that moment, his allowing her to see that piece of his soul without rebuke, was a form of intimacy deeper than any words. The tension was broken a week later by a frantic mooing. A young calf, spooked by a snake, had bolted from its pen and was now leading them on a chaotic chase through the muddy yard. Elias, ever stoic, was surprisingly clumsy in the slick mud, slipping and sliding. Anna, trying to head the calf off, tripped and landed squarely in a puddle, emerging covered head to toe in brown sludge. The calf, finally cornered, stood looking at them with wide, innocent eyes. Elias looked from the calf to Anna, at her mud-spattered face and the weeds in her hair. And then, a sound she had never heard before. It started as a low rumble in his chest and escaped as a short, breathy laugh. It was a rusty, unused sound, but it was genuine. Seeing his rare smile, a real one that reached his eyes, Anna began to laugh too, a full, unrestrained peal of laughter that echoed in the quiet yard. The sound was foreign, but it felt like rain on dry land. The next time he went to town for supplies, he returned with the usual sacks of flour and salt. But tucked among them were two small, unexpected things. He placed them on the kitchen table without ceremony. One was a small paper packet of marigold seeds. The other was a new pair of sturdy leather-work gloves, sized for her hands. Anna looked at the gifts, then up at him. His gaze was steady, earnest. It was not payment. It was a gesture of care, an acknowledgement of her, of the life she was breathing back into this place, into him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she could not name. He simply nodded, but a corner of his mouth tilted upward in the barest hint of a smile. She took the gloves, the leather smooth and strong in her hands. They were a perfect fit. The late summer sun warmed the earth, and the garden flourished, a riot of green and red and gold against the muted tones of the prairie. It was a testament to their shared labor, a living symbol of the hope they had cultivated in the hard soil. They harvested the bounty together, their movements synchronized, their baskets overflowing with ripe tomatoes, heavy squash, and long green beans. That evening, the table was laden with a feast made entirely from their garden. The silence that fell between them as they ate was no longer empty or tense. It was a comfortable, companionable quiet, filled with the satisfaction of their work and the simple pleasure of a shared meal. The air began to carry a new crispness, a warning of the coming cold. The days grew shorter, the sunsets more brilliant. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sky bleed into darkness. The first chill of autumn was in the air. Elias finally broke the peaceful silence, his voice low and serious. Winter's hard here. Anna looked out at the vast, darkening land. It was no longer an enemy, no longer an intimidating emptiness. It was familiar, a part of her. "I'm not afraid of hard," she said quietly. He was silent for a long time, turning a small, smooth stone over and over in his palm. "The road goes on from here," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "If you want it," he was offering her an out, a freedom she had not realized she no longer wanted. She thought of the dusty path she had walked months ago, a woman with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate hope. She looked at the sturdy house behind her, at the thriving garden, at the quiet, steady man beside her. "I think my road ended where it was supposed to," she replied, her voice soft but sure. He finally turned to look at her, and in the deep twilight, she saw an emotion in his eyes so raw and earnest it made her breath catch. It was hope and fear and a profound, aching loneliness that was finally ready to be healed. "This is your home, Anna," he said, his voice thick. "If you'll have it." His words hung in the cool air, a proposal more meaningful than any promise of riches. He did not offer a ring or flowery vows. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused, work-roughened palm enveloping hers. Felt like an anchor. He stood and, still holding her hand, led her inside, into the warm, quiet living room lit by a single lamp. He walked to the low shelf, took out the leather-bound book, and removed the faded photograph of his past. With a reverence that was almost painful to watch, he placed the small, framed picture on the center of the mantelpiece. He stepped back, his eyes on the images of his wife and son, a silent communion with his memory. Then, he turned to Anna and gestured to the empty space on the mantel beside the photograph. It was an invitation, an offering. It was space for a new story to be placed alongside the old one, not to erase it, but to join it. It was his entire heart, offered in a single silent gesture. Time passed as it does on the plains, marked by the turning of seasons rather than the ticking of a clock. Winter came, blanketing the world in a quiet shroud of white, and they weathered it together, the warmth of the stove a bastion against the wind. Spring returned, and with it new life. The prairie turned green, and the air filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. Anna was hanging laundry on a line behind the house, the white sheets billowing like sails in the gentle breeze. She was humming softly, a simple, contented tune. Elias rode in from the fields, his horse kicking up the dark, rich soil. He dismounted, not as a ranch owner returning to his property, but as a man coming home. He walked toward her, and she turned to greet him, a soft smile on her face. He stopped before her and held out his hand. Lying on his palm was a single, perfect prairie rose, its delicate pink petals a stark contrast to his weathered skin. She took it, her fingers brushing his. They stood together for a long moment, not needing to speak, and looked out over the land. Their land. The garden was tilled, ready for new seeds. The house stood strong and welcoming. In the quiet peace of the afternoon, in the shared look that passed between them, was the final, most precious reward. Not of money, but of something far more valuable. It was the profound, unshakable feeling of being home.